Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
We've seen the ads on social media and received flyers in our mailboxes. We know what legislative hopefuls are running on. But what are voters across Idaho really concerned about? Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke joins me to share what he's hearing. I'm Melissa Davlin. Idaho Reports starts now. Hello and welcome to Idaho Reports. This week, Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke joins me to discuss upcoming legislative primaries and what he's hearing from voters. And Shannon McGuire of Spark Strategic Solutions shares findings from a new report about community support for mothers in Idaho. But first, let's get you caught up on the week. On Thursday, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals heard arguments on an Idaho law that says students must use bathrooms and locker rooms that match their biological sex assigned at birth, a lower court previously sided with the state. Attorneys for plaintiff Rebecca Rowe argue the law violates the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution as well as Title IX. The three-judge panel will issue a written decision later. On Monday, Governor Brad Little signed a proclamation declaring this Corrections Professionals Week. At the ceremony, the governor recognized Elijah Jackson, Christopher Wilski, and Daniel Lopez, the three Idaho Department of Correction officers who were ambushed and shot on March 20th at St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center in Boise by a member of a white supremacist prison gang.
We do this every year, but this year's substantially different. Because sometimes things happen in this industry. And when things happen, and all that training comes into play. And, the state of Idaho is very thankful that everyone's here this morning. And we will, as we always do, every time we have one of these kind of circumstances, we will continue to learn and continue to sharpen the saw to get better and better at it.
On Wednesday, while Governor Brad Little handed out ice cream to state employees on the Capitol steps, pro-Palestine protesters marched around the State House before security directed them to go across the street and stop using their megaphone.
Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Hours later, protesters set up tents in front of the State House to symbolically show support for Palestine. Shortly after, officers removed the tents and canopies. Governor Little released a statement on the tents removal saying, quote, Idaho cherishes and protects our First Amendment rights to speech, popular and unpopular alike, but I will not tolerate any group's efforts to establish encampments that damage state property, create health and safety risks, and interfere with other forms of public access. Protesters have denied they have damaged any property or blocked any entrances. Primary elections are coming up on May 21st, and while Friday was the last day to request an absentee ballot, voters across Idaho can still plan to vote early in person. Check with your county for specific times and locations. You can also head to voteidaho.gov to check your polling location if you want to vote in person on Election Day. Remember, if you aren't yet registered to vote, you can register at the polls. You'll need a photo ID and proof of residence. For a full list of what's accepted, go to voteidaho.gov. As we talked about last week, those primary races are heating up. Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke joined me on Thursday to talk about his endorsements in a handful of legislative races, what he's hearing from voters, and how he's settling into his role as Lieutenant Governor a year into the job. Thanks for joining us today. You're a little bit more than a year into the job. How are you liking it so far?
I love it. I mean, what's not to love? I get to travel the state of Idaho. I get to interact with Idahoans, and they confide in me what their concerns are, what they'd like to see, things we could do better, things that we're doing good. I get to tap into Idaho's quality of life, which is not only the backdrop of the natural beauty here, but we've got some pretty interesting people here as well. And anyway, so I enjoy being out and rubbing shoulders with our neighbors.
You know, of all the state elected positions, the lieutenant governor is the most choose your own position there is. Choose your own adventure position. Do you feel like you're making this job what you wanted to make it?
Of course, I'd never done it before, so I didn't know really what to expect. And every lieutenant governor that I've known has certainly had their own style and their own approach. I view myself as being a pro-Idaho policymaker. I want to be out in the communities. I want those opinion makers in the communities to confide in me so that we can keep the state, one that we can all recognize, number one, and one that we can all be proud of, number two. And so I purposely like to travel the state. Next week I'm going up to the north in the Coeur d'Alene area, and we're going to tour some of our state parks. You know, we have a great state park system. That's something that I didn't ever really take advantage of in my other life, and so I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward, and we're also hosting all the other state park directors from around the United States, and so I'm interested in visiting with them and speaking at their at their program, and then touring some of the things that make Idaho great with them.
This is your second session as the president of the Senate, and you come to this job with experience, obviously, as the longest-serving House Speaker. In that job, you also had experience butting heads sometimes with the executive branch, which you're now a part of. Mm-hmm. You have experience now as lieutenant governor, as president of the Senate. Did you navigate that job differently this year with one session already under your belt?
Yeah, I think I did. I was feeling my way the first year. The presiding in the Senate part is not difficult for me. As you said, while it's a little different, it's pretty much the same in presiding as it was in the House. And but the lieutenant governor is the president of the Senate and is the umpire. The umpire doesn't go to the team meetings. The umpire doesn't go to the practices. The umpire shows up for the game, and that is completely different than it was for me as the speaker, where I, at least on some level, participated in the practices, in the meetings, and then on some level was the umpire, just call it the presiding officer. So you don't manage any of the day-to-day drama, any of the day-to-day personality conflicts. You're aware of them, and people will come in and they'll ask you your opinion on this or that. And fortunately, the governor and we get along, and we're philosophically headed in the same direction. We want the same good things for Idaho, and and then it comes about coming up with the agendas and getting those things carried out. And could we do it this way or that way? Well, I have a career of having a strong opinion and of how best to do it. And sometimes, doing it the 6 way as opposed to the half a dozen way, there'll be some things arise. But I've learned to participate in that, voice my opinions, voice my reasoning, and then have to step back. And I think good leaders always do that. They collect everyone's opinion, and then there becomes kind of a consensus path forward. And so I'm getting better at it. I was blessed or cursed, I guess, with strong opinions, and but to work in a group and to participate in a group dynamic is not about one person having a strong opinion or a loud voice in the room or a strident voice in the room. And I think my role is to bring out the different ideas and make sure the ideas are heard and that are validated, because everybody that's in the room is there for a reason, because they earned a place in the room, and therefore what they have to say is valid.
You come to this job after coaching the other team, going from coach to umpire. The new coach of that team, Speaker Moyle, how do you think he's doing?
I think he's doing good for Mike. I mean, his leadership style is not Scott's leadership style. Keep in mind that Mike was the first person that I met when I became a new legislator back in the day. And so we have been around each other for a long time. I think we know each other very well. I think we work together pretty well. And now it's his job. Tag, you're it, Mike. And so it's not my job to second guess him. And so I kind of follow Speaker Newcomb's example. He didn't interfere. I know Bruce had strong opinions, and
continues to have strong opinions.
And continues to have strong opinions. But he let those that followed him be the speaker, and I think that's how it should be. The caucus and the House of Representatives picks their leader, and then they. And then they go ahead that way. And so, but I'm not going to nitpick any of his decisions or his approaches. They are his approaches and his decisions, and that's his job. And the House of Representatives trusted him enough to give him that job. So it's not my place.
You mentioned that as umpire, everyone who is in that Senate chamber has earned the right to be there. They're duly elected officials, but you have chosen to endorse in the upcoming primary in a handful of races, including one in your own district, your Representative Clay Handy. As a member of the executive branch who works primarily in the Senate, how did you get there? How did you decide whom to endorse?
Well, he's my representative. And I endorsed selectively in the Magic Valley as well, because that's my home. And and I've been around these people, whether it's Linda Hartkin or Clay Handy or whoever it is. I have been around these people for a long time, and I trust them to be a keeper of this concept of Idaho that I love. And I think it's high praise to be trusted. And that's why I would recommend it. I a lot of times will run into people back home, and they'll say, "We're never around these people. We don't know them. You know, you're there all the time, and you owe us your opinion because we trust you enough to be there." And so with that trust comes this responsibility to be candid and to be thoughtful. And so I don't do that in a cavalier or reckless way, but in those two examples, I trust Linda Hartkin, I trust Clay Handy, because I know them to be trustworthy.
We're seeing a lot of money in some of these races. As we've talked about on the show, we're also seeing a lot of money in very competitive precinct committee races. Are the stakes in this Republican primary higher this year, or is it about the same?
Well, you and I have been doing this long enough to toss that question around every time. Is this the most important cycle? And the answer to that is yes, because it is this cycle is the cycle, and the decisions we make this time will have ramifications down the road, just like the ones before. Now, do we make corrective measures? And we will in 2 years, and we will in 2 years, and we will in 2 years. And by virtue of that fact, those are going to be the most important elections that we have, or that we've ever had, because that is the election we have. And elections are important. So therefore, they're the most important.
I've seen a lot of these candidates' websites, both incumbents and challengers, and a lot of folks are running on education, they're running on funding, they're running on taxes, but they're also mentioning a lot of social issues, which of course get a lot of attention in both elections and in the media. But you mentioned before, you travel the state, you talk to everybody from firefighters to the Rural Success Summit last week, to schools and educators and ranchers. What are Idahoans really concerned about?
Well, I asked when I was in the firehouse that morning, and the bell hadn't started ringing. Now it quickly did, and the firehouse cleared. But before everybody left, I asked them that exact question: "What are you guys worried about?" And these were parents. They had kids in school. Some of them were out of the military and on the Pocatello fire was firefighting. and they had kids in school and jobs and this and that. Life was happening to them, and those were the concerns that when they let their guard down and started talking, it was like talking to regular parents. They want the best for their kids. Their pocketbook issues. Everything costs a lot. They like to enjoy Idaho's quality of life, and so they're always looking. These guys were into outdoor recreation, and motorized outdoor recreation, and so. They were looking to, so when they're talking about themselves, they're talking about snowmobiles or side-by-sides or the hunting trip here, the hunting trip there, or where we're going to go fishing, or where we're going to take the family out to picnic, or the kids sure had a good time when we did this last year. We're going to try to do that again. And then we had some that were there that were new to Idaho, and were just still kind of blown away at all the opportunities that they had, that Idaho afforded them and their young family. We have a really great state here, and we've been decades in laying the foundation for a really good state. And you cannot blame anybody for wanting to live here and to take advantage of the things that you and I have been able to take for granted for years, decades, right. Generations, frankly. And so so we have these problems incident to growth, but they're not insurmountable. If I'm speaking into a group where it's divided, one thing that can bring a divided audience back together is to talk about education, because there's not one parent or grandparent in that room that doesn't want the best for their kids or their grandkids. And they understand. Life has kicked them around enough for them to understand that it is going to be way easier with a good education that leads to a good job. And it's still going to be tough enough, but then you have an ability to adapt and to live, and so and to provide for your family, and to have a few of the finer things of life. And so, and then they know that the education opens that door to that. And so if you want to bring the room back together, start talking about things we can do to make our education system better. Now, then we start talking about this or that, and we go 100 different ways, but everyone knows the value of education. And I think that's why, I'm proud to be part of of this movement, not only of getting the literacy programs that we're doing to paying our teachers enough to stay and to attract new teachers in. One of our most in-demand careers in Idaho is teaching, and we need to always have high quality, well-paid teachers in front of our kids and grandkids. And and so those are the things that Idahoans want to talk about. They'll grumble about the DMV, or they'll grumble about, we need to get that road fixed, or they'll grumble about, various and sundry things. But I think what really makes them tick is the pocketbook issues, public safety. People are starting to talk about that, because it's been something that we've always been able to kind of take for granted in Idaho. It's a pretty safe place to live. And, but it doesn't matter if we're number one in economic growth if we're not number one in public safety as well. And so these are the things that when people let their guard down and talk to you, it turns out they're just regular folk, and they're motivated by the same thing that we all are, is how we're going to pay for stuff, and we want the best for our kids. But if I'm another thing that is coming up a lot, particularly in the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings, is I can't afford a house, and I want a house, and I'm doing everything I can to do it. And so this chase that happens internally, to get enough resources to get in a house, I think is a big motivator out there as well. If I'm at a community branding, where all the friends and neighbors come, and we still do that and get together out in Oakley, and we're talking to those kids, and they're mostly kids because it's a young man's sport. They're worried about getting in that house,
Is Idaho ready to help those kids out in the
Well,
coming
and see,
years?
that's the dilemma. As a staunch Republican, lifelong Republican, I don't know how you plug public money into helping someone with a private problem of getting into a house. So I think we can have policies, we can have tax incentives, we can do up to a point, but I think much past that smacks of the principles to which I do not espouse. And so that's always the fine line. I think that the market will eventually take care of that. I'm seeing, in other states where investors have scooped up a lot of these houses because the rents are so high and they become attractive investment properties. And that's because the tax structure allows for that to be. And so the policy can manipulate that. And we're seeing other states do that to make these, a residential home not be an investment property. And if it is, then it's taxed differently than it is if it's a residence. So there are things we can do.
We're going to have to leave it there. Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke, thank you so much for
Are we
joining us.
done already?
Already.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Children's Mental Health Acceptance Week. On Wednesday's Idaho Reports podcast, producer Ruth Brown spoke with Brenda Wilson, Executive Director of FY Idaho, about the range of mental health resources available for parents and children. You can listen to that full conversation on the Idaho Reports podcast or on our YouTube channel. And when it comes to families' well-being, the moms matter too. Just in time for Mother's Day, Spark Strategic Solutions and Gallup have released a new report on mothers in Idaho. Here to discuss is Shannon McGuire of Spark Strategic Solutions. Shannon, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited about this report. What prompted it?
Oh, the pandemic. So before the pandemic started, I was already on this quest of thinking about moms. And when everything hit and I watched, I went, oh my goodness, how are moms? And so most of the data and insights that we were hearing were not localized to Idaho. And I thought, let's go talk to Idaho moms, and called up Gallup and said, this is data that's missing not only for Idaho, but the nation. And they were in, and off we went.
And so what did you look at?
Yeah, we looked at so many things. We really honed down on aspirations. We honed in on barriers. What are the well-being indicators and metrics of moms? And what do they want? How are they feeling? And so we looked at all of this. We talked to Idahoans, and we drilled down even further and said, don't forget about moms, and just exploded from there.
You spoke to more than 4,000 Idaho moms for this.
Oh, 4,000 Idahoans, but out of over 4,000 of those, 4,000 Idahoans and 1,700 plus moms were a part of that. So yeah,
that's fantastic. When we talk about this, what stood out to you?
To me, the biggest thing, the emotions. I think it put in perspective the paradox of emotions that moms go through from day to day, and the stress and the burnout, but the emotional undercurrent of the stress. I feel like it was laid bare there, from gratitude and hope and joy to the stress and the loneliness and the anger, all within one day. So moms are not this monolith that are just stressed. They have gratitude and joy and hope too, and I think that's missing in the conversation.
And I think what a lot of people don't understand, if they're not in this specific position of being a mother during stressful times, is that those things aren't mutually exclusive. You can have gratitude, and you can have extreme stress, and you can have anxiety and joy.
Yes, all within a day, and it does impact the people around you and the conversations and how you approach things, but that's why community is so important.
Let's talk about community a little bit more. When we talk about community support for mothers, what does that look like?
Yeah, first and foremost, it starts with the mom. So I know that most people go outward and they think of the macro. I like to start with the micro. Moms taking care of moms, moms taking care of themselves, and then within the family unit in the home. And then as we go outside of that, how are we being neighborly? How are we checking in with each other? Do we offer help and support? And then societally, from the policy and systems piece, do we even understand the mom angle, perspective, and voice? So in order to get into that space, that's why we needed to lay this data bare here in Idaho and start a conversation about moms.
When we're talking about this report, it is Idaho specific. There is limited national data on moms, which is astounding to me.
Yes. And the interesting thing about this report, because it's pioneering, it does open up more conversations that we need to have. And the national comparison that we have, there's good and there's some bad, right? The good is that we have access to outdoor recreation and parks, and we have access to fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that. But
Higher than the national average.
Higher, thank you, higher than the national average. But yet, when it comes to education, mental health services, things like that, housing, childcare, it's pretty stark. Idaho is falling behind.
Yeah, that stood out to me too, that the percentage of mothers who say that they have access to affordable childcare, quality health care, mental health services in Idaho is lower than the national average. And I imagine too that depending where you are in the state, whether you're in Boise or Orofino or Bear Lake or Chalice, that those numbers would probably be different too.
Absolutely. And what is missed is that we're often not labeled as a rural and frontier state. So our population levels, we're roughly 2 million almost. And when we compare that to larger metropolitan areas, it's wild. So the rural environments do struggle a little bit more with access to jobs and healthcare and those things for sure versus the Treasure Valley, which opens up conversation about even more localized data and why it's so needed.
So there are obvious policy implications here, I imagine, when we're talking about things like healthcare and mental health services.
Yes, and child care as well. And I think the conversation needs to start with understanding the perspective and the why. And there's a lot of data in this report. I mean, it's almost a 30-page report, and the voice of mothers and their experiences that are there, so we can localize the conversation in those communities with those elected officials. It's awesome.
What can citizens do?
Oh, check on moms. And like this hashtag, check on moms, and be there and be a guide, because one of the notes in here that also surprised me were almost half of mothers are not asking for help. They're not comfortable. And there's many reasons. I've talked to many moms, whether it's rejection, I did ask, I don't get, but community as citizens, be good neighbors and check on moms and offer support and offer an ear. Ask them how they are. And really, not the grocery store, how are you? I'm good. Like, how are you? And really listen.
You talked about the macro level versus the micro level. That is such a micro thing to do. Just check in on your neighbor. Absolutely.
Yes.
What are you looking at next?
Yes, next we're going national. We'll take this data in Idaho as the catalyst to look at deeper mom insights around well-being and their aspirations and what we can do to support them. So Idaho went first, and I get really excited about that, and I'm gonna keep my voice low because I can scream it. And it's so important because I think the fabric of Idaho community, the connection, the people, the kindness, the ethos of who Idaho is at its core is there, and we can inspire a movement that moms, if we want healthy kids, we have to have healthy moms. So we're going to go nationally and start looking at this data, and Idaho went first.
It's fantastic. Well, we will make sure to link to this report on our website, Built with Care, Unifying Communities Through Motherhood. Shannon McGuire, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for watching. We're going to have a big election preview next week. Make sure you tune in. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next Friday.
Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho, by the Friends of Idaho Public Television, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.